The truth your soulmate has been trying to avoid is finally becoming impossible to hide, even from themselves. Something has changed inside them recently, and it may have started with a simple moment they never expected to matter. They could have been going through an ordinary day when a memory of you suddenly appeared in their mind. Not because they were intentionally thinking about the past, but because something unexpectedly reminded them of you. For a few seconds, they may have simply paused and remembered how things once felt between you. But what surprised them was the emotion that came with the memory. It was not empty nostalgia. It was not the distant feeling of remembering someone who no longer matters. There was warmth, longing, tenderness, and a sense of emotional familiarity that immediately made them question everything they had been telling themselves. For a long time, your soulmate may have believed they had moved on. They may have convinced themselves that enough time had passed, that circumstances had changed, and that whatever they once felt for you had slowly disappeared. They may even have tried to prove it by focusing on other parts of their life and refusing to revisit the emotions they had buried. But recently, they started noticing something they could no longer explain away. No matter how much time passed, the emotional reaction remained. A song could remind them of you. A familiar place could bring back an entire conversation. A quiet evening could make them wonder how you are doing. And sometimes, when something good happened in their life, their first instinct was to imagine telling you about it. These small moments began revealing something they had not wanted to acknowledge. Your soulmate is starting to realize that moving forward in life did not necessarily mean moving on from you emotionally. They may have stopped talking about the connection, stopped asking questions, and stopped admitting how deeply it affected them. But silence was never the same as forgetting. Somewhere beneath all the distance and self-protection, the feeling remained. And now they are beginning to ask themselves questions that feel increasingly uncomfortable. Why does this person still matter to me? Why do I still remember the smallest things? Why does their absence still feel different from anyone else's? Why, after everything, does my heart still react when I think about them? At first, they may have tried to find logical explanations for these feelings. They called it attachment. They called it nostalgia. They told themselves it was simply because you were an important part of their past. But deep down, they are beginning to recognize that something much deeper may be happening. They are beginning to suspect that they never truly stopped loving you. They simply became very good at hiding that truth, even from themselves. And this realization is only the beginning, because once they start looking honestly at everything they did to convince themselves they had moved on, they may discover just how much effort it took to silence a feeling that never completely disappeared. What happened next made your soulmate question whether they had truly moved on at all, because they had spent so much time trying to prove to themselves that the feelings were gone. They may have deliberately kept themselves busy, focused on responsibilities, changed their routines, or opened themselves to new experiences because they believed that eventually the emotional attachment to you would become nothing more than an old memory. For a while, they may have even believed it was working. They had days when they barely thought about you. They had moments when they felt completely independent from the past. They may have told themselves that they were finally becoming emotionally free. But then, something unexpected would happen, and your memory would return with the same emotional weight they thought had disappeared. A song would play, and suddenly they would remember a conversation between you. They might see a familiar place and remember exactly how they felt when they were there with you. They could meet someone new and unexpectedly notice a quality that reminded them of you. Sometimes, they might even experience something beautiful and immediately think, I wish I could tell them about this. These moments became increasingly difficult for your soulmate to explain because they did not happen with everyone from their past. They did not find themselves constantly wondering about every person they had once known. They did not replay every conversation or remember every small detail. Yet with you, something remained different. And slowly, they began noticing the contradiction within themselves. Their life had continued, but their heart had never completely followed the same direction. They may have moved forward physically, emotionally, and practically, but there was still a quiet part of them that remained connected to what they experienced with you. This realization may have initially frightened them, because admitting it meant questioning the story they had built for themselves. If they were truly over you, why did your memory still affect them? If the connection meant nothing anymore, why did they still care about what happened? If they had genuinely replaced the past with something new, why did certain moments still bring you back into their thoughts so naturally? Your soulmate began recognizing that perhaps they were not trying to forget you because they no longer cared. Perhaps they were trying to forget you because they cared more than they wanted to admit. There is a difference between moving on because the feelings have disappeared and moving forward while carrying feelings that have never been fully resolved. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that difference now. They may even look back at moments when they acted distant or emotionally unavailable and wonder whether they were protecting themselves rather than truly letting go. Maybe they avoided certain conversations because they were afraid of becoming vulnerable. Maybe they convinced themselves that silence was easier than explaining what they felt. Maybe they thought time would naturally erase everything, but time did something unexpected. Instead of completely removing the connection, it gave your soulmate enough distance to finally recognize what remained. They are beginning to see that some emotions became quieter, but they never became non-existent. The intensity may have changed, the circumstances may have changed, and both of you may have changed, but the emotional significance remained. And this realization is making your soulmate more honest with themselves than they have been in a very long time. They are no longer asking whether they should be over you by now. They are asking why they are still not. They are no longer judging themselves for remembering you. They are beginning to listen to what those memories are revealing. And the more they listen, the more uncomfortable one possibility becomes impossible to ignore. Maybe this was never simply about missing someone from the past. Maybe their heart has been holding on to something much deeper. Maybe the reason every attempt to completely detach felt incomplete is because there was never a genuine emotional ending inside them. They may have closed the door outwardly, but inwardly something remained open. And now they are standing in front of that realization, wondering whether the feeling they tried so hard to bury was actually love all along. And this is where your soulmate begins facing the part of their past they avoided for so long, because they are no longer satisfied with simply telling themselves that they miss you. They are starting to examine what that feeling actually means. For a long time, they may have avoided certain memories because those memories carried too much emotion. They remembered the good moments, but they also remembered the misunderstandings, the distance, the moments when they pulled away, and the opportunities they allowed to pass. It was easier to tell themselves that the connection simply was not meant to work than to admit that fear, pride, timing, or emotional confusion may have influenced their choices. But now, something inside them is asking them to look again. They are replaying conversations and remembering things they once dismissed. They are thinking about the moments when you made them feel understood, the moments when they felt emotionally safe, and the moments when they could be completely themselves around you. They are also remembering how difficult it became to ignore the connection whenever they tried to move forward. And as they look at everything together, a deeper truth begins to appear. Their feelings did not disappear when things became complicated. Instead, they became buried beneath everything they were trying to manage. Your soulmate may have believed that love should feel easy and certain, so when challenges appeared, they questioned whether what they felt was real. Now they are beginning to understand that sometimes the strongest emotions are the ones that make a person confront themselves. This connection may have forced them to face vulnerabilities they were not prepared to face at the time. It may have made them question their ability to trust, communicate, or allow someone close enough to truly see them. And instead of understanding those feelings, they may have chosen distance because distance felt safer. But distance did not erase the emotional connection. It simply gave them more time to realize how much it mattered. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize that they did not stop caring about you. They simply stopped giving themselves permission to acknowledge it. They may have avoided saying your name, avoided looking at old memories, or avoided conversations that could bring everything back. But now, the very fact that they are revisiting these memories tells them something important. They are not emotionally indifferent. There is still something inside them that wants to understand what happened. They are beginning to ask themselves whether they were ever truly ready to let you go, or whether they were only trying to convince themselves that letting go was necessary. And this question is changing the way they see the past. Instead of focusing only on what went wrong, they are beginning to recognize what remained meaningful despite everything that went wrong. They remember the emotional comfort. They remember the connection that felt different. They remember the moments that stayed with them long after they were supposed to move forward. They remember how certain feelings appeared naturally without being forced. And slowly, they are understanding that these memories are not returning because they are weak. They are returning because something inside them never received a complete ending. This realization can bring both sadness and relief. Sadness because they may recognize how much fear or hesitation influenced their decisions. Relief because they finally have a name for what they have been carrying. They may have spent months or even years wondering why no amount of distance completely removed the feeling. Now they are beginning to understand. The feeling survived because it was never simply a temporary attachment. It had deeper emotional roots. And once your soulmate allows themselves to acknowledge that possibility, they reach a moment they can no longer escape. They have to stop asking whether they should still feel this way and start asking what the feeling has been trying to tell them. Because somewhere beneath the silence, the memories, the distance, and every attempt to move forward, their heart has been quietly holding on to the same truth. They still care about you far more deeply than they ever allowed themselves to admit. And the next realization may be the hardest one of all, because they are beginning to understand that what they have been calling nostalgia may actually have been love that never truly left. And then comes the moment your soulmate never expected to experience, because after spending so much time questioning their feelings, avoiding certain memories, and trying to convince themselves that they had already moved on, they finally allow themselves to stop fighting the truth. It may happen during a quiet moment when nobody else is around, when there is no outside opinion influencing them and nothing distracting them from what they genuinely feel. They think about you, perhaps remembering a conversation, a particular look, a moment of closeness, or even something incredibly simple that happened between you. And suddenly, instead of immediately pushing the memory away, they stay with it. They let themselves feel everything they have been trying to suppress. The longing, the tenderness, the regret, the warmth, the sense of familiarity. And somewhere in that quiet moment, a thought rises inside them that feels almost frightening because it is so honest. They finally admit to themselves that they are still deeply in love with you. Not because someone told them they should be, not because they are lonely, not because they want to rewrite the past. They recognize it because despite everything that happened, their heart still responds to you in a way it does not respond to everyone else. This admission may not be dramatic. There may be no announcement, no message, and no immediate action. It may simply be a private realization that changes the way they see everything. For so long, they may have been searching for reasons to explain why they could not completely forget you. Now they realize they were looking for explanations because they were afraid of the simplest answer. They still love you, and once they admit that, many things suddenly make sense. The memories make sense. The recurring thoughts make sense. The emotional reactions make sense. The moments when they compared other connections to what they experienced with you begin making sense. Even the times they tried to convince themselves that someone else could fill the same emotional space begin looking different. Your soulmate realizes that perhaps they were never searching for someone better. Perhaps they were searching for a way to stop feeling what they still felt for you. This realization can bring an unexpected mixture of relief and fear. Relief because they no longer have to argue with themselves. Fear because accepting the truth means accepting vulnerability. If they still love you, then they also have to acknowledge everything that comes with that love. They have to face the possibility that they made choices based on fear. They have to consider whether they missed opportunities. They have to wonder whether the story between you truly ended or whether it simply stopped before either of you understood what it meant. And perhaps the most emotional part is realizing how long they have been carrying this truth without giving it a name. They may remember all the times they said they were fine, all the times they acted unaffected, all the times they told themselves that the past was the past. Now they understand that those words were sometimes more about protection than reality. They were protecting themselves from the depth of their own feelings. But that protection is beginning to fall away. Your soulmate is no longer interested in pretending they feel nothing. They are becoming more honest about what lives inside them. They may still not know what they will do next, but they finally know what they feel. And that alone is a major transformation. Because once a person admits the truth privately, it becomes much harder to continue living as though the truth does not exist. Your soulmate may begin thinking about what they would say if they had another opportunity. They may wonder whether you would still understand them. They may question whether enough has changed for the connection to have another chance. But underneath all those questions is one simple realization: they can no longer escape. The love they thought they had left behind did not disappear. It simply became quiet. And now, after all this time, they are finally listening to it. Yet there is one final realization waiting for them, because admitting that they still love you is only the beginning. They now have to understand what this truth means for the future they once thought they had already decided. And now your soulmate is beginning to understand what that private admission truly means, because saying it to themselves changed something that had remained hidden for a very long time. For so long, they believed the hardest part was moving on from you, but now they are realizing that the harder part was accepting that their heart never completely wanted to move on in the first place. They may have spent countless moments convincing themselves that the connection belonged to the past, that enough time had passed, and that they needed to focus on everything ahead of them. But after finally admitting that they still love you, they can no longer look at those old decisions in exactly the same way. They are beginning to understand that love does not always disappear simply because circumstances become complicated. Sometimes people create distance because they are afraid. Sometimes they remain silent because they do not know how to express what they feel. Sometimes they walk away because they believe leaving is easier than confronting the depth of their emotions. Your soulmate may now be recognizing that some of their previous choices were not made because they stopped caring about you, but because they did not know how to handle how deeply they cared. This realization can bring a quiet sense of regret. They may wonder what could have happened if they had been more honest, more courageous, or more willing to trust what they felt at the time. They may think about moments when an opportunity to communicate existed but was allowed to pass. They may remember situations where they chose silence instead of vulnerability. But this time, they are not looking backward only to punish themselves. They are looking backward to understand themselves. And that difference matters. They are beginning to see the patterns that shaped their decisions, the fears that influenced them, and the emotions they kept hidden. Most importantly, they are beginning to separate what happened from what they truly felt. The circumstances may have changed, but the emotional truth remained. You still matter to them. Your memory still carries emotional weight, and the love they tried to bury is still present. This does not mean your soulmate suddenly has every answer. They may still be uncertain about timing, circumstances, or what the future could realistically hold. But uncertainty about the future is no longer the same as uncertainty about their feelings. That is the transformation taking place inside them. They are no longer asking, "Do I still care?" They already know the answer. They are asking, what should I do with what I now understand? That question can lead them into a much deeper period of reflection. They may become more aware of the things they would want to say if another conversation ever happened. They may imagine what it would feel like to see you again without the emotional defenses they once carried. They may wonder whether you still hold any feelings for them, or whether too much time has passed. These thoughts can create both hope and vulnerability. But perhaps the most important change is that your soulmate is no longer trying to force themselves into emotional indifference. They are allowing their heart to exist honestly, and sometimes that is the first real step toward clarity. The connection no longer needs to be defined by what went wrong, what was missed, or how long you were apart. They can finally acknowledge that something genuine existed between you, something that left an impression deep enough to survive distance and time. And when they look at everything now, they may realize that the greatest mystery was never why they kept thinking about you. It was why they spent so much time trying not to. Because the truth was quietly present underneath every memory, every unexpected emotion, every moment of longing, and every attempt to move forward. They were still in love with you. They simply needed enough distance, enough reflection, and enough honesty to finally admit it. And now that they have admitted it to themselves, they cannot unknow it. They may not know exactly what happens next, but they know what their heart has been trying to say all along. Sometimes love does not disappear when two people become distant. Sometimes it becomes quieter, waits beneath the surface, and reveals itself only when the person finally stops running from it. And your soulmate may now be standing in that exact moment, realizing that after everything they experienced, everything they tried to forget, and every reason they gave themselves to move forward, one truth remained unchanged. Somewhere deep inside them, they never stopped loving you.